Have you ever had that experience as a podcast host where you think the challenges of your listeners are like these really big complex challenges? Well, sometimes they're not. They're actually really simple. And then you're like, oh my gosh, it's been staring me in the face the whole time. I recently realized that I have been asked one particular question repeatedly, and it turns out I've never actually recorded an episode on it. So today we're changing that. And I am answering the not complicated, but the big burning question of should you be putting episode numbers in your episode titles? Does it actually help your listeners, or does it unknowingly hurt your podcast in some way? Does it hurt your search results rankings? Does it affect the discoverability of your show? And are these leading questions? I don't know. You're about to find out next, so don't go anywhere. Welcome to Insider Secrets to a Top 100 podcast. I'm your host, Courtney Elmer. Let's make your business binge-worthy. Okay, so weirdly, I have been teaching podcasting for years, and I have never thought to record an episode on this, so I have you to thank, because the question of should you be putting numbers in your episode titles has come up quite a bit lately, and I've realized, you know what? I need to break down the pros and cons of this for you, because I feel very strongly about not including episode numbers in your episode titles, and I will tell you why. But I've gotten some pushback on this from listeners who make some very valid points. So let's break it down so that by the end of this episode, you're going to be able to walk away and decide exactly what's right for your show and for your listeners. So the short story is this. I'm not exactly sure when people thought it would be a good idea to start putting episode numbers before the episode title. But once upon a time, someone did. And then other people thought it was cool, so they did too. And then eventually the podcast player apps caught on and started numbering episodes for you. But unfortunately, not all of the podcast player apps thought this was a cool thing to do. So some decided not to number them for you. And this has left podcast hosts everywhere dazed and confused about whether it helps their listeners by adding numbers or whether that hurts their podcast. To be continued, because the story does not have a clear ending yet. But I will tell you that this story can have a happy ending either way, because ultimately it boils down to what's going to be best for your show and for your listeners. So here are some of the most common arguments that I hear for why you should include episode numbers in your episode titles. Number one, that it makes your previous episodes that you refer to on air easier for listeners to find. Well, okay, in theory, maybe it does. I'm being a little facetious here, okay? But I've also heard the case made that because Spotify lets you search now within a given podcast, that having the episode numbers makes it easy for your listeners to find episodes if you train them on how to search inside of Spotify, okay? Maybe. Maybe it does. But unfortunately, not every platform has adopted that in-podcast search feature yet, where you could literally go to a show and search only that show for content that you're looking for. And until every platform adopts that, it's going to be limited to Spotify. And within Spotify, it's a little obscure and hard to find. Like, I literally had this client tell me, Courtney, yes, you can do it this way. I was like, what? I didn't even know that existed. So it's hard to find. It's a little obscure. And I'm always in favor of making things easier on your listeners, not harder. So the three reasons that I recommend under no circumstances that you should include episode numbers in your titles is because after a certain point, it is going to date your episodes. This is the biggest one for me. Numbers are linear. So psychologically, this means that if you have 200 episodes and you're referring back to episode 24, even if episode 24 is really, really good, your listeners are going to think, wow, that's an old episode. And because if you have your episodes listed as episodic, podcast players like Apple and Spotify are going to put the newest episode on top. So your listeners are going to not only have to scroll back further and further and further to find that episode, which most won't take the time to do. Listeners are also trained to think that the longer they scroll back, the older these episodes are. So even if your episodes are evergreen, which ideally they should be, unless you have a podcast that relies on current events, let's say, adding episode numbers in your episode titles will ultimately date your episodes. It's going to be subtle. It's going to be subconscious, but it will be influencing your listener's perception of those episodes nonetheless. The second reason is because no listener really wants to scroll back 4 dozen times through multiple episodes just to find the one episode you referenced in that day's episode from 8 months ago. They just don't. Think of your own user habits. Wouldn't you much rather click a link to go directly to the thing that you're looking for rather than scroll to look for something? And I promise I have a much better way for you to help your listeners find episodes, and I'm going to tell you exactly how to do it here in just a second, okay? But the third reason that I recommend not putting episode numbers in your episode titles is because it takes up valuable podcast SEO character space. So when Apple and Spotify crawl the written messaging of your podcast, they're reading the written messaging to see what is this episode about? What is this podcast about? When they see the numbers first, you're taking up valuable space that you could be utilizing a keyword to immediately signal to Apple and Spotify, this is about, podcasting versus 74 or 208. So the other reason too is for platforms that do number episodes like Apple, like if you click into any episode on Apple, it will show you the episode number right there. So that's redundant. And it becomes even more redundant when you see how I'm going to teach you to help your listeners find older episodes. So the simpler way to do it, in my opinion, is to simply link the episodes that you refer to on air in the show notes of your podcast. That's what I do. And now I can almost hear you asking through your AirPods, but Courtney, those links only show up as hyperlinks on mobile devices. And if a listener is listening on their computer, those links aren't going to be hyperlinked. I know podcast players have to make this so difficult for some reason. I don't know why, but there are a few workarounds. Okay, so let me give you a couple of good options here. The best case scenario is that you are also publishing your episodes to your website as blog posts in such a way that you can easily label that link and post the actual text of that link in the show notes. So for example, my friend Alex Sanfilippo, the founder of Podmatch, does this really well. In every episode that he mentions, hey, go listen to this episode or go listen to that episode, it's linked in the show notes, podmatch.com/349. And so he says that on air, and that's also what he puts in his show notes. So that way, if you're on mobile, it's hyperlinked. You can just click it. And if you're in a browser, you can actually see the whole link. So you can copy it and paste it into your browser. And it's a clean, short, easy link. It's not like some long link that just looks ugly in your show notes. Now, that is a quick, easy, and painless way to do it that covers you all around, whether someone is listening on their mobile device and or listening on a computer. I do it a little bit differently though. And what I personally like to do is I like to actually put the episode title in my show notes and then hyperlink that, because those words from that title count toward podcast SEO. And I trust that most of you are going to be listening on your phone, making it really easy just to click through right there what's hyperlinked and listen to that episode. Or if you are listening on your computer, that you're a smart cookie and that you will simply copy and paste the episode title, put it in the search bar of whatever player you're listening to online, and voila, that episode's going to appear for you. I will tell you that I have never had anyone come to me and say, Courtney, I can't find the episodes that you link in your show notes. We have had people say, oops, they went to the wrong link, or oops, you forgot to link it all together, but not that they couldn't find the actual episode when things were listed and linked appropriately. Now, I recognize that every podcast is going to be a little bit different. So ultimately, you have to weigh the pros and cons to decide what's right for your listeners. But I am always in favor of creating the smoothest listener experience possible. So this is how I do it, and this is what I recommend. Now, that said, I need you to tell me if there's ever something missing in the show notes that I mentioned on air, or if a link isn't working. We need you to let us know ASAP so we can get that fixed for you, because we are humans who produce this podcast. And as much as we hate to make mistakes, we do make mistakes. So if you're ever looking for something, you can't find it, just reach out, let us know. We'll send it directly to you and we'll get whatever it is fixed. I also recognize that this episode might bring up some other related questions, like a really good one that came from stage at Podcast Movement recently, where someone asked, well, what is the best way to help my listeners find episodes related to certain topics that I've talked about previously on the podcast? So for example, this particular podcast host had a podcast that helps people go to sleep. And so he reads Wikipedia articles on various topics, and people listen to it. And the theory behind it is it's going to be so boring that you just naturally fall asleep. And he has a huge following. So his listeners were asking, hey, how can I find more episodes on clouds? Or how can I find more episodes on dogs? Or whatever the topic was. So he was like, how do I help kind of create these content buckets almost, or episode buckets, where it's like an episode list where people can go in and listen to those episodes. And you might have something similar where you've got certain topics that you cover on a recurring basis on your podcast. I talk about podcast SEO a lot here. I talk about podcast marketing here. We've got case studies here that we go into quite a bit. We've got our guest expert episodes. We've got our on-air coaching episodes. So my best recommendation, if you have any sort of episode groupings that you want to create, either under a given topic or under a given segment of your podcast. Let's say you have an episode segment where you do, let's say, on-air coaching, for example, and you want all of those episodes for your listeners to be able to go in and find them easily. My best recommendation is actually to make a Spotify playlist and link that for your listeners. We have some playlists that we use a lot. We hand these out as resources. Like when someone's asking us, hey, how do I launch a show? Or, I don't have the budget to be in your pod launch accelerator, but I would really love to learn from you what I can when it comes to like starting a new podcast. So we've got our starting a podcast playlist. Every once in a while, we'll get a potential client who's like, show me the results that you help people get. So we're like, here's our results page on our website, and here's the playlist with all of our case studies. Now, there's a lot of creative ways that you can do this. In my opinion, no one does this better than longtime podcast veteran Jordan Harbinger of The Jordan Harbinger Show. He's been a guest here on this show. I will link to his episode in the show notes because I have learned quite a bit from Jordan just by studying what he does. And he actually has something that he does for his listeners called episode starter packs, which are essentially playlists on specific topics. You can have these playlists grouped on your website to get traffic over to your website. You can use the Spotify feature for this and actually build a playlist in Spotify. If I had to pick between the two, I would want to send traffic to my website. So my recommendation is build a landing page with all these episodes embedded or linked, and what he does is he's got these episode starter packs, quote unquote, and he has it behind an opt-in. So for his new listeners that are just joining the show for the first time, he's kind of got like his best of series and different topic groupings where listeners can opt in and then get access to those episode playlists. So he's actually capturing an email address in exchange for this free resource of content that he's already created, and all that he's done is just group it together to make it easier to find because he knows what topics his audience is interested in. So you could create playlists related to the most frequently asked questions that you get, or the most popular topics that you cover. And you could link those in your episode footer so it appears under the show notes of every episode you release, makes it easy for listeners to find your episodes. You could put these behind an opt-in, use it as a lead magnet, grow your email list, link that in the footer. You could even put it behind a paywall as subscriber-only content. But I would only recommend doing that if you have thousands of downloads per episode, because historically, paid subscriptions are a very low ticket item and they convert at a relatively low rate. So it takes a lot of them to make any kind of meaningful revenue. So if you don't have a big podcast, just drive that traffic to your email list. You're far better driving that traffic to your list, utilizing this as a strategy to build your list, and then selling to your list down the road if you've got a program or a business behind the podcast, or have advertisers and sponsors sponsor your list. You're going to make way more money that way than you will selling a few $1 a month podcast subscription. So if you found this helpful, and if you love just tactical, quick episodes like this, please scroll down, whatever app you listen on, tap the 5 stars. If you listen on Apple, leave a positive review. I read every single review that comes through, and it helps me learn what you like best about this show and what topics you want to see covered so I can keep delivering more of that for you. And if you have any questions about what we covered in this episode or another question related to your podcast, email my team at the link in the show notes. We love featuring listener questions on air, and I would love to feature yours next. And then don't go anywhere, because in the next episode, we've got an incredibly special guest joining us to talk about 2 of the most effective marketing strategies that you can use to grow your podcast. And if you have a business behind the podcast, to grow your business as well. Someone asked me this at a conference recently. They were like, how did you become so known in the podcasting space? And my answer was through this exact kind of unconventional marketing strategy that we are about to unpack for you coming up in the next episode to help you make your business binge-worthy.